In the bustling spaceport of New Terra, amidst the comings and goings of countless beings, Alara, the alien girl, found herself overwhelmed. The vibrant chaos of Earth's central trade hub was a far cry from the structured serenity of her home world. As she navigated through the crowds, her delicate features were etched with confusion and fear, her vibrant eyes flicking from face to face, seeking an ally in a sea of strangers. At a small cafe overlooking the landing pads, Tom sat nursing a cup of coffee. His eyes were fixed on a datapad, scrolling through schematics and notes. He was a freelance engineer, always on the lookout for the next odd job or project that could use his unconventional talents. The hum of the spaceport was a comforting background noise, one that spoke of potential and opportunity. Noticing Alara's distress from across the room, Tom's attention shifted. He watched as she hesitated at the threshold, her body language screaming discomfort and uncertainty. Setting his coffee aside, he approached her, his steps deliberate and his demeanor friendly. "Hey there, you look a bit lost. Can I help you with something?" Tom asked, his voice warm and inviting. Alara jumped slightly, not having noticed Tom approaching. Her eyes met his, and after a moment of hesitation, she responded, Yes, I am lost. My ship, it's broken, and I don't know where to go here." "No worries," Tom replied with a smile. "I know this place like the back of my hand. What seems to be the problem with your ship?" "It's the quantum calibrator. It failed as I was about to enter the atmosphere. I managed an emergency landing, but now I can't get back to space without repairing it," Alara explained, her voice tinged with a melodious accent. "Quantum calibrator, huh? That's tricky but fixable. I've worked on a few of those in my time. How about you show me where your ship is parked? Maybe I can take a look, see what I can do," Tom offered, already intrigued by the challenge. Relief washed over Alara's features. "Thank you, that would be very kind. I'm Alara, by the way." "Tom," he said, extending his hand, which Alara took tentatively. They made their way out of the cafe and towards the quieter outskirts of the spaceport where smaller, private ships were docked. As they walked, Tom asked questions about her ship's technology, eager to learn more about her alien engineering. "It's based on a crystalline fusion core, quite different from your human tech. The calibrator aligns the core's frequency with the natural quantum flux of spacetime. Without it, the core can destabilize," Alara explained, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. "Fascinating," Tom murmured, genuinely interested. "I've dealt with ion drives and solar sails, but this is something else." Arriving at her ship, a sleek vessel with flowing lines and an almost organic look, Tom whistled appreciatively. "She's beautiful. Let's open her up and see what's going on with that calibrator of yours." As Tom pulled tools from his bag, Alara watched, impressed by his confidence. "Do you always carry your tools around?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "You never know when you'll need to fix something or save the day," Tom replied with a chuckle, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Together, they bent over the intricate innards of Alara's ship, Tom's hands sure and skilled, Alara's graceful and precise. The beginning of an unexpected friendship was taking root, grounded in mutual respect for each other's skills and the shared task before them. Chapter 2. The Junkyard Encounter. The early morning sun cast long shadows over the sprawling expanse of Crowley's junkyard. Tom led Alara through aisles of stacked and scattered remnants of various spacecrafts, his eyes scanning for the perfect piece that could replace the malfunctioning quantum calibrator in her ship. "So, what are we looking for exactly?" Alara asked, her voice echoing slightly in the open air, her steps hesitant among the cluttered rows of metal and machinery. "A compatible quantum flux regulator. It's a long shot, but you never know what you might find here," Tom replied, his tone optimistic. He picked up a rusted piece of metal, inspected it, and then tossed it back onto the pile. As they delved deeper into the junkyard, the variety of discarded technology grew. Tom pointed out different ship models and their parts, giving brief explanations about their functions and why they wouldn't work for Alara's needs. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind a large pile of scrap. "Tom, is that you, mate?" Turning around, Tom grinned and waved. Hey, Alex. Yeah, it's me. Got a special project and could use an extra pair of eyes. Alex emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. He was a fellow engineer and a frequent collaborator on various projects. His gaze shifted curiously to Alara. And who's this? This is Alara. She's from, well, not from around here. We need to fix her ship. Tom introduced, and Alara nodded politely. Pleased to meet you, Alara. Alien tech. Huh? Sounds like a fun challenge, Alex said. His interest piqued as he shook her hand. Indeed. We are attempting to find a substitute for a broken part. A quantum flux regulator. Alara explained, her voice steady, appreciating the additional help. Well, let's get to it then. Follow me, I think I saw something that might work just last week, Alex said, leading the way to a less cluttered section where smaller, more delicate components were kept. The trio rummaged through bins and boxes, occasionally pulling out parts and discussing their potential. Tom and Alex debated the adaptability of human-made parts for alien technology. Their discussion technical yet filled with a camaraderie that made Alara feel more at ease. How about this one? Alex finally pulled out a dusty, metallic object that resembled Alara's description. Tom took it, turned it over in his hands, and looked over at Alara with a hopeful expression. It might just work. What do you think, Alara? She examined the part closely, her fingers tracing the lines and sockets. It's not perfect, but with some modifications, it could indeed serve as a temporary solution. Great, Tom exclaimed. Let's take this back and start on those modifications. As they walked back to the entrance, Tom and Alex chatted about the various projects they had been involved in recently, with Tom explaining a bit more about Alara's background and her journey to Earth. I've got to say, Tom, it's not every day you get to work on alien tech with an actual alien. Alex laughed, clapping Tom on the back. It's definitely one for the books, Tom agreed, sharing a smile with Alara, who responded with a light chuckle. Back at Tom's workshop, the real work began. The three of them spread out the tools and the part on a large workbench. Tom and Alex showed Alara some basic modification techniques, and she quickly adapted her skills to the task, her alien insights invaluable. Hours passed as they worked, soldering, adjusting, and testing the component. The atmosphere was light yet focused, each of them invested in the success of their joint endeavor. As the sun began to set, Tom stepped back and wiped the sweat from his brow. I think we've done it. Shall we give it a try? Alara nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and gratitude. Yes, let's. Together, they had not only built a potential solution but had also forged a bond over shared knowledge and mutual respect, a testament to the unifying power of collaboration. Chapter 3. A Shelter from Scraps. Back in his small, cluttered workshop, Tom stepped around heaps of old components and half-finished projects, clearing a space for their latest endeavor. Alara followed hesitantly, taking in the mishmash of machinery, wires, and tools that made up the human's workspace. It was a far cry from the pristine environments she was used to, but she couldn't deny its charm. This was a place where things were made, built from scratch, piece by piece. Okay, Tom said, clapping his hands and surveying the cleared area. We'll start with the frame. We'll need something sturdy to handle the weight of the shielding panels. He turned to Alara. Do you have any preferences for layout? Any specs from your ship's design we should consider? Alara folded her arms, tapping her chin in thought. The core power supply is stable now that we've adjusted the flux regulator, so the shelter won't need heavy insulation against energy fluctuations. We just need something secure, weatherproof, and big enough for me to work on portable systems inside. Got it. Weatherproof, secure, and roomy enough for repairs, Tom said. He turned to a pile of steel beams in the corner. These should work. Give me a hand. Alara nodded and moved beside him. Together, they lifted the first beam onto the workbench. Tom handed her a pair of safety gloves and a welding mask. Ever welded before? I've used molecular bonding tools, she replied. But your welding techniques are different. Welding's not too complicated once you get the hang of it, Tom said with a grin. I'll show you how. He picked up the welding torch and started on one end of the beam, carefully running a line of molten metal along the seam. See? Just take it slow and steady. You give it a try. Alara took the torch hesitantly, adjusting her grip. Like this. Exactly, Tom said, watching as she mimicked his movements. The seam glowed orange, cooling into a strong bond. That's good. Now finish this side, and we'll move to the next beam. Over the next few hours, the two of them worked side by side, piecing together the shelter's frame. They measured, cut, and welded with a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Tom handled the larger sections, while Alara's nimble hands focused on the finer details, adding brackets, aligning joints, and double-checking measurements. As they worked, their conversation flowed freely. Tom shared stories of his past projects, from rebuilding a derelict shuttle to constructing a makeshift solar array out of spare parts. Alara listened intently, occasionally chiming in with tales of her own. The time she reconfigured a planetary relay station to send encrypted signals, or when she adapted a damaged propulsion system to run on ambient stellar energy. It's amazing how adaptable your people are, Alara said after a particularly clever story. You find ways to make things work, no matter how limited your resources. Tom laughed. We've had to. Humans don't have the kind of advanced tech your people do, so we learn to make do. You'd be surprised what you can accomplish with a little creativity and a lot of elbow grease. By the time they finished the frame, the sun was dipping low in the sky. Tom stretched, his back cracking audibly. All right, that's the hard part done. Tomorrow we'll add the panels, seal the joints, and install the door. Alara stood back, admiring their handiwork. The skeletal structure of the shelter stood sturdy and tall, its simple lines promising a place of security and functionality. It's strange, she said quietly, to see something come together so quickly. On my world, construction is automated, controlled by machines that calculate every detail. Here, we've built this with our own hands. It's rewarding. Tom smiled at her words. It is, isn't it? There's something satisfying about building something yourself. You know every inch of it, every weld and joint. It's not just a structure. It's something you created. They shared a moment of quiet appreciation before Tom finally stepped away. We'd better clean up. Tomorrow's another full day. Alara nodded, still gazing at the frame. As they put away the tools and tidied the workspace, she glanced at Tom. Thank you. He looked up, surprised. For what? For helping me, she said simply. You didn't have to, but you did. Tom shrugged, his smile softening. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Besides, he added with a playful grin, I like a good challenge. She returned his smile, and they continued cleaning, the shelter's skeleton casting long shadows in the fading light. Chapter 4. Learning and Understanding. The next morning, Alara stood in the shelter's unfinished frame, turning a newly forged bolt over in her hand. Tom stepped in, carrying a toolbox and a bundle of metal panels under one arm. He set them down with a soft clang, his face lighting up when he saw her examining the bolt. Looks like you're getting the hang of Earth's hardware, Tom said, grabbing a wrench from his toolbox. That bolt's not perfect, but it should hold. We can test it once we put these panels up. Alara nodded, handing it to him. Your construction methods are simpler than I'm used to, but effective. It's intriguing to see how you work with what you have rather than relying on fully automated systems. Well, Tom said, climbing a stepladder, we don't have much choice. Those fully automated systems you're talking about are still a long way off for most of us. We just make do. He began securing one of the panels into place. Can you hold the other end steady for me? Of course. Alara stepped closer, her hands firmly bracing the panel. As Tom worked, she continued, On my homeworld, we design everything digitally first. Every piece is precision-made. There's no guesswork. Seeing you adjust on the fly, adapt to changes, it's fascinating. Tom tightened the bolt, then shifted his focus to the next panel. It's not just about adapting. It's about understanding how the materials behave. You get a feel for it after a while. If you can't find the exact part, You figure out what's close enough and modify it until it works. That's how a lot of engineers start out. Fixing what's broken, learning as they go. Is that how you learned? Alara asked, genuinely curious. Tom chuckled. Pretty much. My dad was a mechanic, worked on old orbital shuttles. When I was a kid, I'd spend hours in his workshop. He showed me how to fix engines, replace wiring, little things. When I got older, I started taking on my own projects. By the time I was your age, I'd already repaired 3 wrecked transports and put a few custom rigs together. Alara tilted her head. Your age? How old do you think I am? Good question, Tom said with a playful smirk. You look younger than me, but who knows? Maybe you age differently. She smiled faintly, then shifted her attention back to the panel. We do. I'm 53 by my people's measure. Tom nearly dropped his wrench. Wait, seriously? Yes, she replied, amused. Our lifespans are much longer than yours, but physically I'm about, well, I suppose you would say mid-20s. Well, that's something. Guess you have a lot more experience under your belt than I do. Tom returned to tightening bolts, shaking his head. Still, you're here learning new skills. Guess you never stop learning. Huh? Not if you want to survive, Alara said. Every world I've visited, every new culture I've encountered, it's all about learning, adapting to what's around you. Tom climbed down the ladder, stepping back to admire their progress. You've visited other worlds before? Many, she said, her voice tinged with a mix of pride and longing. Part of my work was exploring distant systems, cataloging resources, negotiating trade agreements. But I've never stayed anywhere for long. It's strange being grounded like this. Grounded? Tom repeated, stepping closer. You mean stuck here on Earth? Alara nodded. Yes, without my ship, I have nowhere to go. I've always been in motion, always had a destination. Now I feel lost. Tom watched her for a moment, then leaned back against the ladder. Lost isn't the worst thing. Sometimes being lost means you get to see things you never would have if you stuck to the path. She glanced at him. Do you really believe that? I do, he said firmly. Some of the best things I've built came out of moments where I had no idea what I was doing. You find a way. You learn as you go. Their eyes met for a moment, a quiet understanding passing between them. Alara looked down, then back at the shelter frame. Perhaps that's what I need to do. Learn how to stay in one place, how to build something from scratch, even if it's temporary. Tom picked up another panel, handing it to her. Well, if you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach. Let's get this shelter finished. They worked in silence for a while, the sound of metal on metal filling the air. As they moved on to installing the door frame, Tom showed Alara how to align the hinges and adjust the spacing. She caught on quickly, her movements more confident than the day before. You're a fast learner, Tom remarked as she tightened the last bolt. I've had good teachers, she replied, a hint of warmth in her voice. When the final panel was in place, Tom stepped back and wiped his hands on a rag. Not bad. We've got a solid shelter, and you did more than half the work. Alara tilted her head, examining their creation. It's not what I'm used to, but it's functional. And I helped build it. That you did, Tom said. Welcome to the world of hands-on construction. For the first time since they'd met, Alara smiled. Not a small, reserved smile, but a genuine, bright expression that reached her eyes. Tom noticed, and for a moment he simply stared. Then he grinned back and clapped his hands. All right, let's clean up, he said. We've got more to learn tomorrow. Chapter 5, A Gesture of Trust. Later that week, Tom and Alara worked on more than just patching up the shelter. The panels were secure, the door frame adjusted perfectly, and even the makeshift heating system, rigged from old ship components, hummed quietly. Alara now spent most of her time in the shelter, fine-tuning small devices she had salvaged from her own vessel. Despite the progress, her demeanor remained reserved. Tom could tell that something else weighed on her mind. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Tom arrived at the shelter carrying a small satchel of parts. He found Alara sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring intently at an alien-looking tool in her hands. She looked up when he entered. "Hey," Tom said, setting the satchel down. "Working on something new?" Alara nodded, but her expression was distant. "It's a portable interface module. If I can get it to function, it might help me diagnose the deeper issues in my ship's core systems." Tom crouched beside her, pulling a half-built device from his bag. "I brought some signal converters I thought might help. They're not exactly what you're used to, but if we adapt the inputs, it should give us cleaner data." She took one of the converters, turning it over in her hands. "This might actually work. You're getting good at thinking like an Icarian engineer, Tom." "Hey, maybe you're rubbing off on me," he said with a grin. "We've been at this for a while now. I think I'm starting to understand how your tech works, at least a little." As she examined the part, Tom noticed her hands tremble slightly. It wasn't from fatigue. Something else was bothering her. He leaned back on his heels and tilted his head. "Alara, is something wrong? You've been quieter than usual today." She hesitated, setting the converter down. "There's something I haven't told you." Tom sat down on the floor beside her. "I'm listening." Alara stared at her hands. "My ship. It's not here in the spaceport. It's hidden. I didn't think I could trust anyone when I first arrived, so I landed in a remote location and concealed it. I've been afraid that if anyone found it, they might try to dismantle it or claim it for themselves." Tom let her words sink in. "That's understandable. A ship like yours would attract a lot of it." "Because I need your help," she said, looking up at him. "I can't fix it alone. If I'm going to have any chance of getting back to my people, I need someone who understands Earth technology, someone I can trust." Tom nodded slowly. "Okay, so where is it?" "It's in a valley a few kilometers from here, buried under a camouflage field," she admitted. "I haven't been back since I came to the spaceport. I wasn't sure if I should involve you, but I realize now that I can't do this on my own." Tom leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I appreciate you trusting me with this. If you need help, I'm in. We'll get that ship back in working order." Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Thank you." The next morning, Tom packed a small bag with tools and a portable scanner. Alara led him through a winding path that eventually opened into a secluded valley, overgrown with dense vegetation. She stopped in the center of the clearing and pressed a sequence on a handheld device. A shimmer of light revealed the outline of her ship, nestled into the hillside. Tom whistled. "You weren't kidding about the camouflage. It's a standard feature on our exploratory vessels," Alara explained as she deactivated the field completely. The ship appeared in full, sleek and metallic, with a hull that seemed to shift in the sunlight. Despite its beauty, it was clear the craft had taken a beating. Portions of the exterior were scorched, and one of the stabilizing fins was bent at an odd angle. They spent the entire day examining the ship. Tom marveled at the design while Alara explained its systems. He quickly realized that, while advanced, many of the ship's components shared a surprising number of similarities with human tech. It wasn't an exact match, but the principles of engineering, power flow, structural integrity, and energy dispersion were universal. "This engine housing," Tom said, pointing at a panel near the rear of the ship. "It's not too different from what I've seen on larger cargo haulers. If we reinforce it here, we can stabilize the thrust output." "You think that will hold?" Alara asked, leaning over to examine the spot. "Yeah," Tom said confidently. "I've done similar repairs on smaller Earth ships. The materials are different, but the concept is the same. Once we stabilize the thrust output, we can focus on getting the core systems back online." The two of them worked tirelessly, removing damaged panels, replacing wiring, and realigning the bent fin. As they worked, they fell into an easy rhythm, passing tools back and forth, discussing the next steps, and occasionally sharing a laugh when one of them made a minor mistake. At one point, Alara stopped and wiped her brow. "You know, I wasn't sure if I'd ever see this ship functional again." Tom looked at her, then at the progress they'd made. "It's got a ways to go, but we'll get it there." You're not in this alone anymore. She smiled, her gratitude evident in her expression. It's strange. I've always been the one people depended on back home. I never thought I'd find myself relying on a human for something so important. Maybe it's not about who's relying on who, Tom said, tightening a bolt. Maybe it's just about figuring it out together. That's how it's supposed to work, right? Alara nodded. Right? Chapter 6, The First Touch. Tom wiped the sweat off his forehead, tossing a rag onto a nearby workbench. The two of them had spent hours working on the ship, coaxing its damaged systems back to life. The once battered vessel now looked like it might actually be space-worthy again. Alara stood nearby, her focus on a control panel she had just reinstalled. Her fingers flew over the interface, eyes narrowed in concentration. How's it looking? Tom asked, leaning against the bulkhead. Alara frowned slightly. Better. The calibration is holding steady, and the energy levels are finally stabilizing. But, Tom prompted. She sighed. There's still a slight variance in the power core. It's small, but if it grows, it could destabilize the entire system during flight. Tom rubbed his chin. Maybe we need to check the secondary regulators again. If one of them is misaligned. No, Alara interrupted, her tone thoughtful rather than dismissive. We adjusted those earlier. The issue is coming from the primary conduit. I think the connectors are slightly out of sync. Okay, Tom said, grabbing his tool belt. Let's fix it. Lead the way. They moved deeper into the ship, past the main control room and into the heart of the engine bay. Alara stopped in front of a panel, pried it open, and pointed at a series of glowing tubes and conduits. These 3 connectors here, she said. They need to be realigned. Tom knelt down, peering inside. That's a tight squeeze. How'd they even install these things in the first place? Elaborate assembly drones, Alara replied, already reaching for a slim tool. But we'll have to do it manually. Tom grinned. Well, let's see if we can outdo their fancy drones. They worked side by side, passing tools back and forth, their movements careful and deliberate. Tom's shoulders brushed against Alara's as they adjusted the connectors. Each time he moved to get a better angle, she shifted to match, their proximity growing closer as they maneuvered in the cramped space. Hold that steady, Alara said, leaning in closer. I just need to. Tom held the connector in place, his fingers brushing against hers. They both froze for a moment, their hands touching as they focused on the task. Then Alara adjusted the connection, her fingers lingering on his just a bit longer than necessary. You're doing great, Tom said, his voice quiet. Just a little more. Alara glanced at him briefly, her expression softer. Thank you. Once they finished, Tom straightened up and stretched. That should do it. Let's run the diagnostic and see if it worked. Alara nodded, but she didn't move right away. Her gaze lingered on him, as if she was about to say something. Finally, she broke the silence. You've been very kind to me, more than I expected. Tom gave her a reassuring smile. Well, I'm not the kind of guy who leaves someone stranded if I can help it. Besides, you've done just as much for me. I've learned a lot working with you. She smiled faintly. I never thought I'd say this, but I feel comfortable here, with you. Tom scratched the back of his neck, unsure how to respond. Well, I'm glad I could help you feel that way, and for what it's worth, I feel the same. It's been good having you around. There was a pause, a moment of quiet that neither of them seemed eager to break. Then, tentatively, Alara reached out and touched his arm. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. Tom looked down at her hand, then back up at her face. Alara, he began, his voice low and hesitant. You okay? She nodded, her hand still resting on his arm. I'm not used to this. Having someone care. It's nice. Tom swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. Instead, he placed his hand gently over hers. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to be. Alara stepped closer, the gap between them shrinking. She tilted her head, her eyes searching his. Tom, Before he could respond, she leaned in, her lips brushing against his. It was hesitant at first, as though she wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. But when he didn't pull away, she pressed a bit closer, her hands moving to his shoulders. Tom's breath caught. He hadn't expected this, but as her warmth spread through him, he realized he didn't want to stop it. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her gently into the kiss. It was unhurried, a quiet moment that felt like it belonged just to them. When they finally parted, Alara took a step back, her expression both shy and hopeful. I didn't mean to surprise you." Tom shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "You didn't. Well, maybe a little, but it was nice. More than nice." She laughed softly, her tension easing. "More than nice." "Yeah," he said. "A lot more." They stood there for a moment, both of them unsure of what to say next. Finally, Tom broke the silence. "We should probably finish the diagnostics, make sure those connectors are holding." Alara nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Yes, we should." As they walked back toward the control room, their steps fell into an easy rhythm. The air between them had changed, subtle but undeniable. For the first time, they weren't just two strangers working together. They were something more. Chapter 7. Cultural Celebration. As the days turned into weeks, the shelter grew from a makeshift structure into a cozy, functional space. Alara's ship repairs were nearly complete, and although the prospect of her departure loomed on the horizon, the bond between her and Tom only deepened. Tom decided to surprise her with a trip to a local cultural festival, a yearly celebration that transformed their small town into a bustling hub of lights, music, and vibrant displays. "You ever been to a festival?" Tom asked as they strolled down the main street, which was now lined with booths offering food, handmade crafts, and holographic art displays. Alara tilted her head, her eyes scanning the lively crowd. "We have communal gatherings back home, but nothing quite like this. It's overwhelming, but in a good way." Tom chuckled, motioning her toward a booth where a vendor was selling brightly lit necklaces. "You'll get used to it. First things first, festival gear." He picked up a glowing necklace and placed it around her neck. Alara touched the light strands, smiling. "Do humans always wear these?" "Not always," Tom said with a grin. "But they're fun. Come on, let's check out the food stands." As they navigated through the festival, Tom introduced her to a variety of earth delicacies. He handed her a stick of roasted meat and watched as she cautiously took a bite. Her eyes widened in surprise. "It's smoky and rich," she said, taking another bite. "I like it. See? You're practically an earthling now," Tom joked. "Try this next." He passed her a small pastry filled with fruit, and she laughed softly at his enthusiasm. "You're enjoying this as much as I am," she said, amused. "More," he admitted. "There's something satisfying about sharing this with you, seeing you experience it for the first time." They moved on to a section of the festival dedicated to live music. A band played a fusion of traditional and futuristic sounds, blending stringed instruments with electronic beats. The crowd swayed in time with the rhythm, and Tom nudged Alara. "Want to dance?" he asked. Her brows lifted. "Dance? I've seen it, but I'm not sure I'd be very good at it." Tom extended a hand. "It's not about being good. Just follow my lead." Hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. He led her into the crowd, showing her a simple step. She stumbled at first, but he steadied her with a gentle touch. Slowly, she found the rhythm, her movements becoming more fluid. Laughter bubbled out as she spun once, then twice, her glowing necklace bouncing with the motion. "I'm dancing," Alara said, her tone half disbelieving, half delighted. "You are," Tom confirmed, grinning. "And you're doing great." As the song ended, the crowd erupted in cheers. Alara and Tom stopped, breathless and smiling. For a moment, they stood close, caught in the lingering energy of the music. Her hand remained in his, and when their eyes met, neither felt the need to look away. "Thank you for this," Alara said softly. "It's nothing," Tom replied. his voice equally quiet. I'm glad you're having fun. They continued exploring, stopping by a booth showcasing artistic holograms. Alara studied one intently, a swirling image of a planet's surface, dotted with floating cities and interconnected bridges. This reminds me of home, she murmured. Your world is like that? Tom asked, leaning closer. Not exactly, but the scale, the design, it feels familiar, she said. It's strange. Being here at this festival, sharing this with you, it almost feels normal. Tom smiled. Normal's not a bad thing. Sometimes normal's just what you need. They walked on, pausing at a stand where an older man was selling small hand-carved trinkets. Alara picked up a wooden figure of a bird, its wings spread as if ready to take flight. What's this? She asked. It's a dove, Tom said. A symbol of peace. She turned it over in her hands. It's beautiful. The vendor spoke up. You two make a good pair. Let me give you a discount. Tom laughed. We're just... Thank you, Alara interrupted, smiling at the vendor as she handed over the payment. She looked at Tom and handed him the figure. A gift. For me, Tom said, surprised. For showing me this world, she replied. He accepted the trinket, touched by the gesture. Thanks, Alara. As the night wore on, the festival grew livelier. They watched a fireworks display, the bright colors reflecting in Alara's eyes. Tom couldn't help but watch her more than the fireworks, marveling at how far they'd come since their first meeting in the scrapyard. This has been wonderful, Alara said as the final burst lit up the sky. She turned to him. You've shown me so much, Tom. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, he said, his tone sincere. It's been just as meaningful for me. They stood together, the hum of the festival fading into the background. Alara reached out and took his hand. He squeezed it gently, their connection feeling as natural as breathing. Come on, he said after a moment, pulling her toward another part of the festival. I think there's still one more thing you need to try. She followed him, her steps light, her heart feeling strangely full. The festival wasn't just a celebration of culture. It had become a celebration of their growing bond. In that moment, surrounded by light, music, and laughter, they felt as though they had found a small piece of something they didn't even know they were searching for. Chapter 8. A New Dawn. Alara stood just outside the shelter, staring at the sky as it shifted from black to soft blue. The first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, illuminating the outline of her repaired ship. After weeks of work, countless hours of planning and problem-solving, it was finally complete. Tom appeared behind her, still groggy but smiling. Couldn't sleep? He asked, rubbing his neck. She glanced at him and shook her head. It's a big day. I thought I'd watch the sunrise, maybe clear my mind. Understandable, he said, stepping up beside her. So, everything's ready? Alara nodded, though her expression was tinged with hesitation. Everything is functional. The diagnostics check out, and the calibrations are stable. And yet you don't look happy about it, Tom observed. She took a deep breath. I am. I just didn't expect to feel so torn. This is what I've been working toward, what we've been working toward. But leaving here, leaving you, it feels like you're leaving behind more than just a place, Tom finished quietly. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the ground. Exactly. They stood in silence for a moment, the gentle hum of the ship's systems the only sound. Finally, Tom placed a hand on her shoulder. Alara, you've got your own life out there, your people, your mission. That doesn't just stop because you found something meaningful here. It just means this isn't goodbye forever. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. Do you believe that? I do, Tom said firmly. We've come this far together. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you find ways to make things work, even when the odds aren't in your favor. Alara managed a small smile. You always find the right words, don't you? Part of my charm, he replied with a grin. Now, are we going to run that final pre-flight check? Or are we just going to stand here staring at the sunrise all day? She laughed softly. Let's get to it. They went through the pre-flight sequence together, double-checking the repaired systems. Tom monitored the energy outputs while Elara adjusted the control interface. Their movements were smooth and synchronized, a testament to how much they had learned from each other over their time together. As the engines hummed steadily, Tom stepped back, looking up at the ship. It really does look beautiful, doesn't it? Elara joined him, her arms crossed as she admired the vessel. It's not perfect, but it's mine. And it works, thanks to you. Hey, you did more than half the work, Tom said. I just helped when you needed it. Still, she said, turning to face him, I couldn't have done it without you. You're important to me, Tom. He met her gaze, his voice quiet but sincere. You're important to me too, Elara. Another moment of silence passed before she reached out, her hand finding his. They stood there, hands entwined, until the sound of the ship's systems cycling down brought them back to the present. Well, Elara said, I think it's ready. All that's left is for me to go. Tom nodded, though the weight of those words hit him harder than he'd expected. Yeah, all that's left is for you to go. They walked together to the base of the ship's ramp. Elara hesitated, then turned to him one last time. I'll come back. As soon as I can, I'll find a way to return. I'll be here, Tom said with a faint smile. But don't rush it. Do what you need to do. She stepped closer and, without a word, leaned in to kiss him. It wasn't hesitant or fleeting this time. It was a promise, a quiet reassurance that distance wouldn't erase what they had built. When they pulled apart, she stepped onto the ramp. Goodbye, Tom. See you soon, Elara, he replied. As she ascended into the ship, Tom stepped back, watching as the engines powered up. The ship rose slowly, its sleek form silhouetted against the now fully risen sun. It hovered for a moment before angling upward, disappearing into the vast expanse of the sky. Tom stood there long after the ship was gone. The wooden dove Elara had given him still in his hand. He looked down at it, then at the empty horizon, a small smile spreading across his face. See you soon, he whispered, turning back toward the shelter.